Welcome back to Client Success Matters. I'm your host, Jo Rogers, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Gemma, someone who I only met a couple of months ago, but we quickly discovered our careers have crossed paths more times than we could count. It's amazing how small the industry really is when you start connecting the dots. In today's episode, we're diving into a topic that's on every agency leader's mind: bonuses for client services teams. Are they the golden ticket to motivation and retention? Do they create more problems than they solve? We'll explore whether bonuses actually drive long-term performance or just encourage short-term thinking, the common pitfall that can tank team morale, and how to balance individual reward with team collaboration. Gemma shares some brilliant insights on what meaningful recognition actually looks like in a high-pressure, client-focused roles, and gives us a framework for thinking through bonus structures that don't backfire. Whether you're considering implementing bonuses for the first time or questioning whether your current system is working, this conversation is packed with practical advice you can use straight away. Before we jump in, if you're finding value in these conversations, please hit subscribe and leave us a rating. It really helps other agencies discover the show. All right, let's get into it with Gemma. Hey Gemma, it's so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me. It's funny, I only met Gemma actually a couple of months ago, but we quickly realised our worlds cross constantly through the course of our career. And we actually know loads of the same people.
Isn't that agency life anyway, though, Jo?
Sure.
Pretty incestuous, is it not?
Oh, it certainly is. It was certainly fun to reminisce, for sure. Anyway, back to today's topic, which is going to be about bonuses and whether they're the right thing to introduce to your client services team. But before we dive in, Gemma, do you want to give those listening a quick overview of who you are and what you do?
So Gemma Hood, founder of Culture Hood, set up Culture Hood 5 years ago. We focus on creating great places to work and creating what I call sticky company cultures. So sticky means a company which not only attracts people to come and join that business and work for that business, but also retain long term as well. So really focused on building really great company cultures so that business can then grow successfully, sustainably, and all that lovely stuff.
Fab. And the reason why I wanted you to come on the podcast is that I've actually had quite a few agencies coming to me over the course of probably the last 6 months or so, struggling with accountability of their client services team, actually trying to go out and find new business and trying to find ways of incentivizing them, and looking at whether bonuses is actually the right thing for them to do, to introduce them to their agency to try and motivate them. From your experience, does that really motivate client services team in the long run, or does it just drive that sort of short-term behavior?
Super good question. And I think one thing to note on your point, because the market is so competitive when it comes to the world of agencies, businesses are having to work a lot harder to look at that employer value proposition. How are we going to attract talent to come and join this business over our competitors? And more agencies are being more creative in terms of what they're offering. And you're right, bonuses is certainly something that I see a lot of agencies that I work with focusing on bringing into their business. However, I've seen so many businesses that just don't get it right. They really don't. And it's a case of me having to just unpick it a little bit and then put it back together again. So in terms of what bonuses, what bonus schemes, programs can offer, there are a huge amount of advantages in terms of boosting morale. People feel valued, and as long as that's done fairly, they feel valued and start to feel that real sense of belonging. The other thing is it can really sharpen what I would say, sharpen commercial thinking. It's going to build upon that awareness and encouraging that strategic thinking, understanding where this business is going. What does that mean? And having that commercial understanding is going to be really helpful for any agency that's scaling. And it's also really going to drive that collaboration and alignment. It's going to be enabling that business to communicate, this is where we're heading. This is what we're looking to achieve. Let's all get in this boat and let's row together in the same direction. And that's a huge value to any agency. But I really caveat this with, it has to be done fairly. I'm sure we'll dive into this, but just making sure it's rolled out properly, because it can be quite detrimental.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned there are some common pitfalls. What are those sort of things that you do actually see in those agencies that haven't rolled them out properly?
Going back to how bonuses are set up, I think sometimes if a bonus scheme is focused purely on revenue, that can have quite an unhealthy impact on company culture. And I know we're talking about client services, And there's various discussions that I've had in terms of, as an agency, do you look at a bonus scheme that's of every team member within that agency, or whether or not it's purely focused on client services? And there are very different ways of looking at it. Because if you have a bonus scheme which is set up, which is perhaps focused on revenue or even profitability, you could then say, okay, from a creative team perspective or from a strategy team perspective, at what point do you draw the line? Because I could be sat here as a creative, you will have won that pitch, we would have won that client, or we wouldn't have done if I hadn't had a certain impact in the delivery of that. So just that piece around communicating, how does that impact the wider team? And what are we really focused on driving, I think is really paramount to communicate right at the beginning. And just going back to that pitfall piece, just making sure you're really clear as to what is it that we're doing with this bonus scheme that we're rolling out? What's the point of it? Yeah. How does it align to our philosophy, our aims, our mission, our values, and our behaviors? If that's jarring and if it's not aligned, can potentially create an unhealthy environment rather than a healthy environment. So it's about being really clear as to what you're trying to achieve from implementing a bonus scheme.
Yeah, it's really interesting you talk about that, because I'm trying to think of all the different scenarios in my head that I've spoken to with agencies. And a lot of it is that they're wanting to drive an individual's.
Yeah.
Again, I go back to accountability of going out and finding new business. Typically, that's what it's always about. It's about targets aren't being met. They need to hit their targets. I need to drive that accountability, but it's, they're not doing it off the bat. But if I put a bonus in front of them, will they do that? In those type of situations, what are the pros and cons of setting it up when that's your driver?
The other things that I'd say that, I know you're saying that we want to hit a certain revenue target, but is there a lot to be said for things like client retention, profitability? And sometimes I see those bits missed off. It's all very well hitting that target, but what's the repercussions if we've got this client, we've won this fantastic client, but we're over servicing. We've had 3 or 4 people leave the business and it's actually cost us recruitment fees to go find somebody else. So, oh yeah, fab, we're going to pay you a bonus, but it's had a detrimental effect on our company culture. So that's certainly other areas to be looking at in terms of the bonus scheme. But I think what I see working really well is when a business not only focuses on specific business targets, be that profitability, client retention, client feedback, NPS scores, etc., but also then coupling that with personal goals, alignment to values and behaviors. And quite recently, actually, I worked with an agency and they were very much focused on revenue targets. And I opened that out and looked at, okay, it's all very well us hitting that revenue target, but what does that mean in terms of the team and what other behaviors do we want to be driving? So we then created a weighted scoring system where we attributed a certain percentage to company values, personal goals, and meeting revenue targets. And what that meant was that if we were really clear in terms of the percentage, and we then scored how those particular individuals did against those, we had a really constructive conversation when we were coming up to giving said bonus that actually we scored you really high, you met your targets, but actually 50% of your team's left. So from a team management perspective, we've got a situation going on there. So you're not encouraging, appreciating, valuing those potential behaviors that have a detrimental effect on your company culture and your overall health and performance of your business. So having that really clear framework was really important, just setting very, very clear expectations and what was important to that business.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so when in those type of situations where you're doing that, because there's a little part of me that sort of thinks to myself, that sounds very similar to your performance development that you have. So how do you differentiate between you're doing you're ticking all the boxes in terms of what I'm expecting of you to do and promotion, for example, to what's aligned to a bonus?
So this all boils back to, what does your agency have in place from what I call a performance enablement strategy perspective? So the fundamental framework in terms of how are we measuring? How often are we measuring? What does that cadence look like? Goal setting, peer-to-peer feedback, all that lovely stuff as part of that performance enablement strategy. Now, what I also would expect to see as part of a performance enablement strategy is to have really clear competencies. What is expected of me as a senior account manager and what's expected from a competency perspective for me to go up a level to get promoted. Now, what you can do then is once you've got that really clear framework, you can set some really clear, smart objectives in and around that from a personal development perspective. But if you then start to weave in, you as a senior account manager should be delivering X amount of revenue with X amount of clients over a certain period of time, it is just a really clear, transparent conversation to be had, and enables you then to start to construct an element of your bonus system framework in and around you meeting your personal objectives as well. It's really fundamental to have a proper performance enablement process, cadence, to gather all of that really great qualitative and quantitative content that's going to enable you to have a really good, great, honest conversation. And I also think another piece to add to this is such a big thing when it comes to driving a really healthy company culture. And trust can be really eroded with something like a bonus scheme that's not been set up properly internally. So by having a really clear background, a really clear framework for that conversation, how it's going to be measured, helps build that trust and credibility as well for your senior management team.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And the other thing that's making me think as well is that do bonuses only apply to senior management, as in like the most senior people that hold the relationship with the clients, because if they're essentially the one tasked with driving that growth? Or is it, should that filter down to the team that's supporting them to deliver that work? Like, how does that work? If it's only for one person, does that feed negativity with those that are supporting them to essentially get their bonus?
So there's two schools of thought here. I'm probably not going to answer your question. I'm probably going to be on the fence. But I think it depends on the agency. I think it depends on the size of the agency. And it depends what you're aiming to drive, nurture, build from a company culture perspective. Because if you're looking at from a team collaboration to reduce silos, you could go, right, okay, we have got one bonus scheme that is set up in this way, and we're going to measure people in this way. And X% is going to be put on personal goals, whether or not we hit whether or not you hit your revenue target. And it could be a case that you've got different levels with different revenue targets associated to them, depending on what seniority level you are. But in one hand, I'm very much in school of thought in let's have a bonus scheme which is set up where we're all putting together, we're all in one team together. It doesn't matter if I'm in a creative or whether or not I'm a junior or whether or not I'm a senior. Let's create something that's fair here. Versus that of focusing purely on seniority. I don't know what that quite says. What are you trying to drive from a more are you saying that potentially they're more important? I don't know. Versus that of somebody who could be an unsung hero who is potentially not on the front line, who's not got a finger on driving that number, but they are a fundamental piece to the delivery of that. I think it's a really important discussion to be had, but I think it goes back to values. What's important to your business? What kind of culture are you trying to drive? What is that employer value proposition that you're trying to communicate as a business?
Yeah, and it's making me think about bonuses versus recognition as well.
Yes.
Do you want to just give the listeners a bit of an overview of the difference between bonuses and recognition?
So from a recognition perspective, what you're essentially saying is that we value you, and ways in which you show appreciation can be delivered in many different ways. That could be through a bonus, financial piece of appreciation, or it could be through non-financial strategies. So if I were to look at perhaps a company that I've worked with quite recently, we created a really layered approach. And the layered approach had many different facets to it in terms of how we were going to show recognition. But it was all linked back to company values. We wanted to do was shine a light on those positive behaviors that we wanted to create a ripple effect around. We wanted to shine a light on this is what we see as good. This is what we want to keep strong. And the different elements that we added into that recognition strategy as a whole, peer-to-peer recognition. Now, peer-to-peer recognition is just a platform and ability for employees to say thanks at any point in time, instantly, for a particular something that has happened. That could be related to your behaviors, but being too tight on that, sometimes what I see is people are a little bit reluctant through Slack or Teams or whatever to give the recognition. Whereas if you're just saying, just give thanks for, be that I had to hit a particular deadline for a particular client and designer X was able to deliver that, turned it around in X amount of time. Thank you so much. I want to give thanks for. And what that does is it highlights the unsung heroes. But then we layered with that peer-to-peer through Slack. We then layered that with a quarterly employee of the quarter. And what that enabled us to do was for any employee in the business to vote for somebody who had demonstrated, who was the exemplar of a particular value. And they could nominate that person. That person then gets put into our pot, and then they then decide who wins that employee of the quarter. But the interesting thing that we did there was that we actually got the previous winner to decide on the employee of the quarter for that next quarter, because what tends to happen is you get that element of hierarchy where perhaps the senior management team decide on that employee of the quarter. It can create, or it can perhaps create, unconscious bias thinking, maybe that hierarchical element. But anyway, so peer-to-peer recognition layered with employee of the quarter is really important. But see, I don't know if you've ever heard of the 4 languages of appreciation. Because we have such a diverse of people that are in the workplace at the moment, there are many different motivations and ways in which I like to be recognized. I like to be shown that I'm valued and that I've got a sense of, I feel a sense of belonging being within this business. And as we talked about before, that could be monetary or it could be non-monetary. But there are these 4 languages of appreciation, which comes from the language of love. And essentially what those are is you've got words of affirmation. So that could be verbal or written praise, back to the peer-to-peer recognition, sending a thank you message, a shout out to a particular individual can go a long, long way. Whereas it might not work for somebody else. They might absolutely cringe that someone's giving me a shout out in a quarterly meeting and that I'd never want to go through that again. It was absolutely horrendous, but it works for some people. You've then got quality time. So focused attention and a meaningful interaction with that particular person could go a long, long way in showing appreciation for them. So maybe one-to-one time or out for lunch with a particular senior manager, or being able to collaborate on a particular project that they would usually get involved in. The third one is active service. So supporting through help for action. Be that through me maybe offering you some help on a particular project because maybe you've got quite a bit on your plate. But then you've also got the fourth one, which is tangible gifts. So that's a thoughtful physical item or token of some sort, token of appreciation. Be that somebody knows that I like Snickers, let's say, and I've done something and I get a Snicker bar on my desk. Absolutely fabulous. Although it's small, it's a token of appreciation that some people might value over words of affirmation. So looking at how people like to be appreciated is really key for any kind of recognition strategy, but linking that and layering that with the financial and non-financial elements as well, I think is really important.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about another agency that I know has introduced bonuses. And one of the things that they're finding, they've sort of got like a pod structure. What they're finding is one is so driven by the financials. They're doing really well, which is great. But the other 2 pods are not, and they're not, the behaviors that you're talking about before are obviously not shining through, or it's not driving this to it. And what it does is it makes them look like they're not trying or they're not doing as fun as the other pod. And funnily enough, I used to actually work client side for a recognition company. So I'm a massive advocate for recognition. I think it works so well. Their platform was amazing. We used it in the company as well. And it just drives such a wonderful feeling when you get some kind of notification to show that someone has recognized just a piece of work that you've done within a project. You're not waiting for anything. You're not waiting for an invoice to drop. You're not waiting and being reliant on clients as well. It's actually on what you're physically doing. But can you see, or do you think that bonuses and recognition can work together? Or is it typically that you choose one or the other?
No, I think they work together. I really do. And it just goes back to you've got such a diverse pool of people from Gen Zs, millennials, alphas aren't quite there yet. But I think you've got different roles, I think you've just got to look at that whole piece. You've got to look top level strategically. What are we trying to achieve as a business? What types of behaviors are we wanting to drive? And what does that look like in terms of sharing appreciation? Another key part is listening to your people. So I'll do a lot of throughout my discovery that I do when I initially engage with an agency, I'll run an engagement survey. A lot of people roll their eyes when they hear about engagement surveys, but actually you don't get engagement survey fatigue, you get non-response fatigue, where you roll out an engagement survey and you don't get any kind of update in terms of what's come out or what the actions are. But I think they're really important to understand what are the motivations for our people, what type of things are they thinking that are working well and not working well. And from that, you can then start to construct not only what you've heard from your employees, but what we're trying to achieve as a business to come up with a really strong and robust recognition strategy. Could include a bonus scheme as well.
So if someone was thinking about it now, if you had an agency that was thinking about, implementing something because they're feeling like whether that's the values or behaviors or, there's, growth isn't happening or just the expectations of the team aren't on where they want it to be, what would you say was the first thing that they do?
There's a load of things that were going around in my head in terms of, what I would expect to see. I think the first thing, what we just said, is being really clear on why, the why and the what, ensuring it links back to your philosophy, your values and your behaviors. And then starting, because then that will then seal your structure. From a bonus perspective, we're going to look at a weighted scoring system. It will then help with that. But then I also think linked to that, if you're going to roll out some sort of bonus scheme, you need to be looking at what does your performance review, what does your performance structure look like? How are you measuring performance and enabling your people to thrive within your business? And that will need a strategy as well to link through to. Yeah. And I think that balance between the non-financial and the financial recognition is really key part of that. And another thing that I see that doesn't tend to happen is the communication of this is what it is and this is how we're going to measure you. That just doesn't seem to happen. So that transparency around what does your actual policy look like from a bonus perspective. And also, Jo, one thing that I've also noticed is the word discretionary bonuses. And sometimes I feel that can sometimes be used as a bit of a way to go, actually, we're not going to give you what you think you're going to get because they're only discretionary. And I understand the whole point of doing discretionary, but I think if you're going to do discretionary, just make sure you're super clear in terms of what it is. Be transparent in terms of how we're measuring you and what we're expecting as part of that. I just see that really lack that piece of communication that sticks together.
I've seen a number of agencies do that actually, where they say, if we hit company target, you'll get a bonus. And then everyone's doing everything they're supposed to be doing. And then the company doesn't hit the bonus. And then those that are very driven by money will feel like very negative against it.
Yeah.
Leave or, have a very negative view of the agency.
Trust is broken.
I feel like that driver of the bad behaviors can come from implementing a process like when they sort of feel like, well, I've given 110%, but or that sort of feeling of like, I've given 110%, but the person next to me is only given 50.
Yeah.
And, the result is that I haven't got my bonus, which is why I sort of feel like, at least if you overlay that with recognition as well, showing appreciation in other ways, don't wait for, I don't know, whether you do it on a quarterly, 6 months or annual basis, there's the constant continuous appreciation for what people are doing rather than just having to sort of wait to find out whether, did I hit my target this month?
Yeah.
Get it? Did I?
Yeah. And I mean, it's about just being really realistic. Are we really going to hit that? Are we perhaps driving people a bit too hard? And it goes back to, what does that criteria look like? What are we actually measuring here? Is that client retention? Is that profit? Is that client feedback? There are many different things that you could potentially put into that. It isn't just based on that number. Yeah. Although I understand that as a business, you can only really pay out bonuses if you hit a certain threshold. I get that.
But what's the repercussion? I suppose. Yeah. What's the repercussion? It always comes down to that thing of, you can't control clients at the end of the day. You can't control when they're going to finally actually go ahead with their project or, when they're actually going to say yes. Can't control if they're going to pull a project. So I know one account director could have great growth clients and, really easy clients. One account director could have really difficult clients, not a lot of growth opportunity, see a high churn, nothing to do with them. And I think that can sort of breed that sort of.
It can, but that's why when you've got but I think that if you're really clear with your scoring, you may not have, perhaps we haven't hit, we've not hit a target from a revenue standpoint, but actually you've exceeded when it comes to your personal goals and you have absolutely smashed it out the park. If you cut you in half, you are our values and behaviors through and through. Yeah. Therefore, we crept up that bonus piece just a little bit. And it's a really open and honest conversation. We haven't hit our target, thanks very much, off we go. It just helps with that conversation, having that kind of criteria there, because you're thanking them for all the hard work you put in. And you know what? certain circumstances have meant that we've been unable to put the percentage on that particular weighting because of XYZ.
Yeah, that's the logical way to do it, isn't it? You don't want to breed any, potential animosity and stuff internally.
It's true. I see it a lot.
So I think the fundamental of this is that it's so important to work out why you're doing it in the first place. What are you doing it for? What are you trying to get from your team? What
behaviors are you driving?
What behaviors are you driving before you start implementing anything? And actually starting to, I probably, that other step is, as you said, who are you dealing with here? What type of people have you got in your agency as well? Like, what are the actual drivers going to be? Because bonuses might not drive them. A recognition program could be all you need, just a way to make them feel like they're valued in the agency. So it's really important to start to just really understand who you've got in your agency, isn't it?
And I think one thing that agencies also need to be careful of is that bonuses are not an excuse for us to pay a lower salary. It might be a bit of a sensitive subject to be bringing up, but where I have seen it is it's a case of we can't quite meet what that particular candidate is expecting. But what we'll do is we'll say base and we'll top it up with. And then further down the line, you then end up getting to a situation where we can't pay bonuses because of XYZ. And that's where trust is lost. And that, again, was why it's so important to make sure you've got your salary bands per level.
And I feel as well that sort of really feeds into that sales mentality, which actually client services are not sales. They should not be seen as sales. They are growth levers. And to have them in sort of set up like a salesperson's bonus structure, you are going to absolutely get the wrong behaviors from them, because they are going to look at their clients as a commodity. They're just going to be sitting there going, right, what revenue can we get out of you? They're not going to be looking for opportunities. They're just going to have that sort of sales mentality. And you're going to start to piss off clients at the end of the day. And that is not where you want to be in your agency at all. So it's a really important point to note there as well. Great. Well, thank you, Gemma. I appreciate you coming onto the podcast and all of your thoughts on that. It's been a really interesting topic for me. I know that a lot of people are thinking about it. I think, in the climate that we're in at the moment, I'm always trying to think of ways of, growth within current clients as well, and how to get teams to really start focusing on that. And bonuses has definitely come up as can we start to incentivize, if they're not going to do it, how can we make them do it, sort of thing, and there's a lot that goes around that. But particularly talking about bonuses and recognitions, this has been really interesting, and I'm sure that those listening will get a lot from it. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your wisdom.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.